Hello and welcome to this special episode of Voices to End Hunger. I'm Minerva Delgado. Late last week, the U.S. Department of Agriculture announced that the federal government would cease providing funding for SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, starting on November 1st in response to the ongoing government shutdown. This announcement was met with both moral and legal pushback on the Hill and from beneficiaries and advocates across the country. Today, I speak with David Super, the Carmack Waterhouse Professor of Law and Economics at Georgetown University Law Center. He explains what's going on with SNAP, how we got here, and what beneficiaries and communities should expect in the coming days. David, welcome to the Voices to End Hunger podcast. It's a pleasure to have you today.
Thanks very much for having me. I look forward to talking.
Well, we have a lot to talk about because on Friday, USDA sent out guidance saying that it was suspending November SNAP benefits. And I'd love to talk to you about how we got here and what this recent news means.
Well, unfortunately, we got here because the administration has become increasingly willing to disregard the law to advance its political agenda. The Food and Nutrition Act says that any eligible household who applies for benefits must be given benefits, and the administration has taken it upon itself to simply ignore that.
And, we can talk a little bit more about that because there have been shutdowns in the past. And how is this issue usually dealt with?
The issue has been dealt with in various ways in the past. Each shutdown is a little bit different, but people have always gotten their benefits, and that includes the record-breaking shutdown we had during the first Trump administration, when the administration said again and again and again that it was determined to keep people getting benefits that they were entitled to under the Act, and the administration was very clear that contingency funds could be used to pay those benefits, the very point that it agreed to up through last week and then did a 180 on Friday.
David, as a legal scholar, can you tell us what USDA's legal obligation is during this time?
Well, USDA's obligation is to follow the law, and the law says provide benefits to eligible families that have applied for SNAP. Congress has provided a contingency fund for just this sort of situation. It's also given USDA authority to transfer funds from other accounts for just this situation. USDA has the means to comply with the law. They just need the will to comply with the law.
And we did see last month in the case of WIC that they did use funds from a revenue source that they can tap into for child nutrition programs. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Certainly. Under a very old law going back to the 1930s, 30% of customs revenues that the U.S. collects go to the Department of Agriculture for a variety of purposes, the most significant of which is running child nutrition programs. Right now, as of the beginning of October, that fund had $23 billion in it from last year, plus a lot of carryover from earlier years. So the fund has plenty of funds in it. The administration recognized this by moving $300 million into the WIC program, and it could just as easily move the necessary amount into SNAP. It's chosen not to do so.
David, what rationale has USDA provided for withholding SNAP benefits in November?
Well, they led us to believe up through the middle of last week that they would use the contingency funds to provide those benefits. Then all of a sudden at the end of the week, they declared that somehow these monies couldn't be used. They weren't available for regular SNAP. They were only available for disaster SNAP. But there's nothing in the law that says that. The law says they're available for programs under the Food and Nutrition Act, which includes regular SNAP, disaster SNAP, state administration, and a few other things, all in the same act, all covered by the same appropriation.
Thank you. And as you pointed out, even if they want to save those contingency funds for a disaster, which is their prerogative, there are other funds that they can tap into to pay out SNAP benefits. So it's not as if they're being hamstringed in that way.
They have an obligation under the act to pay out benefits. The only possible justification for not doing it is saying that they simply had no access to any money, but they do have access to money, the contingency fund and the transfer authority. I certainly support giving assistance to people who are facing a hurricane or an earthquake or what have you. But I also support giving assistance to people on an ongoing basis. More importantly, so does Congress. And that's the administration's obligation.
Thank you. And, we should be addressing the daily disaster of folks who don't have enough money to put food on the table, which is why they're eligible for and using SNAP. So we want to make sure we do whatever we can to help those folks get the SNAP benefits that they need. Speaking very practically, what should SNAP beneficiaries expect? Will they suddenly not be able to use their EBT cards come November 1st?
No. What USDA is currently saying is that they simply won't be providing the November benefits to add to those cards. So people who have a balance from prior months can still access that. Unfortunately, USDA has been putting out very mixed signals, changing their story frequently. And one of the stories that they put out at one point last week was that they would turn off people's EBT cards so they would lose access to their old benefits. That would be completely illegal. There's no authority for that. And at least USDA has recognized they can't do that. So whatever people have on their cards already will still be there to spend, but they won't be getting their November benefits.
And is it a done deal that they won't get November benefits? Is it possible that USDA could reverse this? And if they do that, how long does it take to get those benefits turned on? I would imagine some states may be ready to go earlier than others if they get the permission to use the November benefits.
The USDA could certainly turn its position around. Indeed, over the few days since their reversal on Friday, they've been trying out several different positions. There's an extraordinarily offensive statement on their website about blaming people for this who have absolutely nothing to do with it. They could decide that they actually want to do their jobs and pay these benefits and start them up. How fast states could get them out to people varies a lot by state and by their contractors with the companies that run their electronic benefit transfer system. But from the state people I've talked with, I think it would be a very few days. Not overnight, but maybe 3 days, 4 days before the benefits would start going again. So this is a problem that USDA has time to reverse completely now and can set back on the right track fairly quickly if they decide to do so.
David, if USDA doesn't reverse its position and SNAP benefits are suspended for November, can states use their own funding? And what's the likelihood of that?
We've heard a number of states talking about it. To be honest, SNAP is an expensive program because there's so many food insecure people in the country that need it. The cost of that is pretty staggering, and a number of states' budgets are already under stress, so I'm not sure how many will do that. There's no provision for that in the Food and Nutrition Act, so any state that did that might not get reimbursed. There's no clear authority for USDA to pay those states back. Congress could, of course, provide that authority in the legislation ending the shutdown.
Thank you. What could downstream impacts of suspending November benefits look like for states, communities, individuals?
This is a disaster. The reason that people qualify for SNAP is because they can't afford to buy food through ordinary channels. The eligibility criteria are quite strict. Some of the assumptions about what households can do are already unrealistic. So these are households that don't have any slack in their budgets, that don't have any capacity. And the downstream consequences are very disturbing. Some households will buy food and go into arrears on their rent, eventually get evicted. Some households will buy food and go into arrears on their utilities and eventually get their service cut off. Emergency food providers are already under pressure because of the huge SNAP cuts in the legislation last summer, and they're not going to be able to meet this kind of need or come close to it. In our own area, emergency food providers are also under stress because of all the federal employees who've been fired. So this is a complete disaster for households. States are going to be under pressure to use their very limited funds to try to fill a part of this gap, and that could lead to other state budget cuts down the line as states try to cope with this. This is going to have ripple effects that we will be dealing with for years to come.
And I've been talking about the potential ripple effects of taking $8 billion next month out of the economy, right? This money goes to retailers. It supports jobs at grocers. It supports the entire food supply chain. Would you agree with that?
I would, and I would also note that a lot of food retailers are holding on by their fingertips. Their markups are fairly small, they depend on volume, and as you say, you're now pulling $8 billion of volume right out of the system. I suspect we will see closures of food stores, the chain stores, outlets in particularly lower income areas that are already marginally profitable may get shut down. And this too will leave us with a lasting hole in our food infrastructure long after this government shutdown is ended.
Thank you. How might this affect other food programs? So, for example, school meals or WIC beneficiaries?
It won't affect them directly. As I said, the USDA has a large amount of money available for the child nutrition programs. Those programs could keep operating for many more months, even if Congress doesn't end the government shutdown. WIC is largely dependent on transfers for the child nutrition programs right now, but they have the funds to support it. So WIC could keep going as long as the administration chooses it to go. But those other programs are all assuming that families that need SNAP get SNAP. School meals are not intended to provide a full nutritious diet. They're intended to feed the kids while they're at school with the idea that they go home and get food, often purchased with SNAP, to provide the rest of their nutritional needs. WIC's very name is a supplemental program because it is supposed to be on top of SNAP benefits. So neither of these programs will do their jobs with SNAP knocked out.
And what recourse do you see to try to get SNAP funding back on track for November? And related to that, what can our listeners do?
This really is a matter of the administration making a choice. The administration has been consistent that contingency money is available to pay for SNAP. It's said that again and again and again in the shutdown of 2018, 2019. It said that consistently this time until Friday, and they simply need to change their mind. Yes, I've heard talk about moving legislation in Congress, but the legislation we already have could not be clearer. So I don't object to moving a bill, but I don't see what the point is if the administration is going to ignore the law we already have. They might well ignore a new law.
We've been advising our listeners to reach out to Congress and the administration, let them know that this is not an acceptable action, that USDA, as you said, has the funding and the authority to go ahead and release November SNAP dollars. And we hope that they will do that. David, thank you for your time today and for your expertise.
Very much my pleasure. I enjoyed the conversation, and I hope that we can speak again in better times with less ominous prospects than Snap faces right now.
Thank you. I look forward to it. That was David Super of Georgetown University Law Center. You can stay up to date on this issue by following us on social media, and you can leave a question or comment by emailing us at podcast@alliance10hunger.org. Today's episode was produced and edited by Nate McGrath, and I'm Minerva Delgado. See you next time.